Welcome back, Cubs. Direwolf here. And today, I want to talk to you about cultural appropriation, which is one of the regressive left's favorite ways of both calling you a racist and being racist themselves simultaneously. It proposes the illogical and insane idea that one culture cannot borrow from or be influenced by another. But more specifically, they believe that white people do not have culture, and that it is wrong for white people to borrow any kind of influence from any other culture, but it is not wrong for those other cultures to borrow anything from what you might call white culture because they don't believe it exists. With this in mind, and understanding the context that they believe that white people are the oppressors and are always taking from or taking advantage of other races, I'd like to respond to this insane article written by Jagger Black on 22 May. An article titled, "This Week in Appropriation, Kooks, Burritos, and Willamette Week." It reads, "Portland has an appropriation problem. I disagree. I believe it has a social justice problem, which is a cancer on our society. This week in white nonsense is a great way to start a sentence if you want every reader to know that you are racist against white people. Keep in mind, if ever you found an article that started with, 'This week in black nonsense,' everyone would know it is racist. But because this is against white people, it is totally culturally okay in social justice circles. Obviously, I disagree with the sentiment that all white people are evil and everything they try to do is wrong. However, I do really appreciate the writer of this article letting us know in the very first line that she's a hateful racist, which really sets the tone for the rest of the article. How thoughtful. Two white women, Callie Wilgus and Liz Connolly, decided it would be cute to open a food truck after a fateful excursion into Mexico. Something tells me the writer of this article thinks that's a bad idea. There's really nothing special about opening a Mexican restaurant. It's probably something that happens every day. But the owners of Kooks Burritos all but admitted in an interview with Willamette Week that they colonized this style of food when they decided to, quote, pick the brains of every tortilla lady there in the worst broken Spanish ever. Here she incorrectly uses the word colonize as a synonym for appropriate, which is incorrect because she means appropriate in the sense to take without permission. In the physical sense, they did not take tortillas from anyone. Everyone who had tortillas before still has tortillas now. The lives of those people in Mexico remain unchanged by a new American restaurant producing tortillas. Nothing was physically removed or taken from the people in Mexico. In the sense of intellectual property, no one person owns the recipe for tortillas. These tortillas have been made by millions of people over hundreds of years. This particular recipe may be uniquely popular in Mexican culture, however, tortillas are not unique to Mexican culture. But even if they were, a culture cannot own something, and you cannot take something from a culture. When American culture adopted aspects of Mexican culture, they did not take it from the Mexican culture. The Mexican culture still was as it was before the Americans adopted parts of their culture. It is normal and completely morally acceptable when two cultures come in contact with each other for them to adopt different aspects of each other's cultures. Cultural adaptation is a positive thing. Cultural appropriation is something you say when you want to signify that you have a very low IQ, but since she's implying that tortillas belong to the Mexican culture and the Mexican culture alone, I think it's important to point out before we move forward in the article that the Mayans invented the tortilla, not the Mexicans. So if you believe Jagger Black's idea of cultural appropriation, then all of Mexico and everyone else who eats tortillas needs to give them back to the Mayans because they took it from the Mayans. With that in mind, let's get back to Miss Black's article, which she produced using a computer and internet, which she falsely appropriated from another culture. She continued, "You can eat $5 lobster on the beach," Connolly said, "which they give you with a bucket of tortillas." The they she was referring to was probably the Mexican abuelitas the two women preyed upon in order to appropriate the secrets of their livelihood. Again, I remind you, nothing has been taken from them. They can still make tortillas like they always have, and their business and their livelihood has not been negatively affected because someone's opening up a food truck in America when they live in Mexico with a bunch of other Mexican restaurants also making the same tortillas. Miss Black is using misleading and emotional language when she describes the Mexican restaurant owners as being preyed upon, while in reality, they are most likely blissfully unaware and completely unaffected by someone opening up a restaurant in America making the same tortillas. She continued, "Suitably impressed, these tourists began asking the locals questions about how these tortillas were made. They told us basic ingredients," Connolly said, adding, "but they wouldn't tell us so much about technique. I wonder why. This is where things went from quirky to predatory, if you haven't already guessed. Actually, if I were to guess, I would say you're looking for moral impropriety where there is none. Like all social justice warriors, you already believe that white people are evil and oppressive, and you're trying to find evidence for this, but all you're finding are fake things to be outraged about. They probably didn't want to go into too much about technique because the person person speaking to them did not speak very good Spanish, and because they're probably far too busy to spend time showing one of their customers how to make tortillas. Not because tortilla making is some sort of big secret. I find it comical how outraged you are for these people, when in reality they, like most people in Mexico, would think you are completely insane for complaining about someone quote-unquote stealing something as common as a tortilla recipe. That'd be equivalent to complaining in America about someone stealing the standard recipe for pancakes. Only in America are we so well off that someone would complain about someone else quote-unquote taking the recipe for tortillas, which is probably available online anyways. And she continues. We were peeking into windows of every kitchen, totally fascinated by how easy they made it look. She said, "So, let's recap the story thus far. These two white women went to Mexico, ate tacos, and decided they would just take what the locals clearly didn't want to give them. If that wasn't bad enough, they decided to pack up their stolen intellectual property and repackage it in one of the few places where such a business would plausibly work. Portland, Oregon." Interesting summary, Miss Black. Here's my summary thus far. You're an idiot. These two people, race and gender not important, while traveling abroad, discovered a technique that was new to them for creating a common food. Then they decided to use this information, which is not owned by any one person or any one culture, to open a restaurant in a different country, thousands of miles away, that does not compete with the restaurant that they learned the technique from. The end result being that Portland, Oregon now has a new, hopefully good restaurant, and no one was harmed. But unfortunately, thanks to people like you, Miss Black, the story doesn't end there, does it? Again, she continues, while describing themselves on their Yelp biography, which has since been edited. Connolly claims to have a mean tortilla flip, while Wilgus appointed herself as the director of vibes. And our little abuelita with recipes from the heart, even though the recipes were stolen. The tortilla recipe was not stolen, and I'm sure she's not referring to just the tortillas, but probably all of the food that she makes. And I also want to point out how pathetically sad it is that they had to change their Yelp biography because of easily triggered nutcases like you. I have a feeling your reaction is far less about them oppressing anyone or them taking anything from anyone else, and far more about you being jealous of their success. And the article continues, week after week, people of color in Portland bear witness to the hijacking of their cultures and the identifiable pattern of appropriation that has been created. Several of the most successful businesses in town have been birthed as a result of curious white people going to a foreign country, or international venture, and poaching as many trade secrets, customs, recipes as possible, and then coming back to Portland to claim it as their own and score a tidy profit. Trade secrets like the technique for making tortillas. You're really coming off as sounding very petty and jealous. What really bothers you is that they're being successful with these new ideas. They're doing nothing different than going to a trade school and learning how to cook different foods from different countries. They are being wise entrepreneurs. They're thinking outside the box, and they're bringing products to new markets. What they're doing is good business, and it harms no one. Nothing is stopping people of color from making the same businesses. Why aren't you doing it, and why are you being jealous and angry that someone else did do it? And then she says, don't get me wrong, cultural customs are meant to be shared. That's the truth. Miss Black, you should have stopped right there because cultural customs are meant to be shared. However, you went on to say, however, that's not what happens in this city. That is exactly what happened here. You want them so badly to be wrong because you see that they are successful and you are not. And if they're being successful, they have to be doing something wrong. Because if they're doing something right, that means what you are doing is inadequate. Partner that with your obvious bigotry against white people, and it's very clear you did not write this article in defense of anyone else. You wrote this article for yourself. And she goes on, because of Portland's underlining racism, people who rightly own these traditions and cultures that exist are already treated poorly. If it is true that people of color, which sounds like to me every race but white, are being treated poorly in Portland, and I'm not saying it is true, how does opening up a restaurant with their traditional food add to the poor treatment in any way? If these restaurants are popular, it's because they're providing a product or a higher level of product that was not available before. This is not bad for those communities because it's both providing a product that is wanted and it's also producing jobs. These people benefiting from cultural exchange is not harming anyone and is actually good for your community. And then she says, people of color are nothing more than an afterthought when white perpetrators of this tradition continue to do this on a regular basis. Again, I remind you, every single day of your life, you're using products and services that were invented by other cultures. Our culture and the products within our culture are an amalgam of many different cultures that came before it. No matter what job you ever do in your life, you will most likely benefit from a technology or a product that was invented by someone who was not from your culture. But bringing it back to white people making ethnic-style restaurants, if it is your culture, why didn't you make the restaurant that they made that became successful? Nothing is stopping you. And again, she continues, while Portland is supposedly a progressive place, super liberal white people usually only have other super white liberal people to answer to. which means this cycle of cultural appropriation will never end until people of color call attention to it. I suggest when you're calling out oppression that it should be a real oppression, otherwise you're going to have the effect of the boy who called wolf. Basically, if you spend your time complaining about someone stealing a technique on how to make tortillas from Mexicans, then it's possible no one will ever take anything you say seriously ever again. When it comes to you, I know I won't. And then she said, and call attention to it we did. As soon as Willamette Week, who has a history of publishing racially insensitive food commentary, published this story, people of color were outraged. I assure you their outrage has nothing to do with their skin color, and all to do with them being a member of the regressive left. Even some of those aforementioned super liberal white people. It's very obvious how much you detest white people, but that just shows that I'm right. It is not about skin color, it's about ideology. You all bow at the altar of social justice, no matter how illogical and how harmful it is personally to you or your community. And then she wrote, the comments on the article went up in flames, and pretty soon the story was even picked up by a national outlet. Following the WW article, one commenter said, now that you boldly and pretty fucking unapologetically stole the basis of these women's livelihoods, you can make their exact same product so other white people don't have to be inconvenienced by dealing with pesky brown middle women getting in their way. Great job. Wow, that commenter is just as ignorant and racist as you are, Miss Black. They're not only selling food to white people, they're selling food because it is popular and a lot of people want to buy it. Them traveling to Mexico and being served Mexican food by Mexican people and then choosing to sell Mexican food in their hometown is not evidence in any way of them being racist. In fact, this story leads me to believe that they very much have an appreciation for the Mexican people and their culture. You are the only ones attaching racism to this story. You are the one putting emphasis on the race of the people involved. You are the one saying that someone can or cannot do something based on their race. You are treating people differently based on their race. You are a racist. If a black person opened up a Mexican restaurant, you wouldn't bat an eye. If a Mexican opened up an Asian restaurant, you wouldn't care. If a white person does either one, it's wrong because they're white. Another commenter explained what's basically a sad truth underlining the Portland restaurant community. Black writes, if you knew anything of the restaurant industry or Google, you'd know that this is true. Ethnic chefs are expected to cook from their ethnic backgrounds, while white chefs can do what these two horrible women did. Vacation anywhere and get inspired and appropriate any entire culture's cuisine and claim it as their own. This is very incorrect. White Americans are expected to know how to cook the normal American foods, while white Germans are expected to know how to cook the normal German foods, and white Englishmen are expected to know how to cook the normal English foods. The same goes for Spaniards, Italians, and the Scottish. People are naturally going to believe if you are from a country that you know the food from that country. And if you're an American of any skin color, it's very likely you know how to cook foods from many different places. That said, it doesn't matter what people expect of you. You can learn how to cook and cook anything you want. Any person of color, any ethnic minority could do the same thing those two white women did. You're the one that is limiting yourself by saying that other people's expectations matter. Black's article goes on for quite a bit longer and ends up blaming this whole situation on being a sign of white supremacist culture. I could respond to the rest of the article, but it'd be a lot of me repeating what I've already said. Her arguments are complete nonsense. The concept that cultural appropriation exists and is morally wrong is only ever applied to white people. If she had an ounce of intellectual honesty and applied the concept universally to all cultures and all people, it would be readily apparent that it's not a workable theory. The shocking part of this story is not that social justice warriors believe this. We already knew that. We know they hate white people, and we know they hate when white people are successful. We also know that they often accuse others of being racist while demonstrating racism of their own. The true story here is the innocent restaurant owners who did nothing wrong, who were being creative and industrious and adding to their community, were subjected to such racist, vile, and constant harassing attacks that they were forced to close their restaurant. A level of horrible racist behavior that would never be socially acceptable towards a black person is being applauded by the aggressive left towards a white person. She finished the article like this. While the closing of Kooks Burritos is a victory, it's a small one, and unless we continue to can this out, it will happen again. In the meantime, it helps to support the originators of various cultures. If you're really dying for a burrito, here's a list of 6 Latino-owned restaurants that also exist in Portland. The massive irony being that all of our cultures originated from other cultures, and most of our cultures are interconnected. Also, the idea that you should go to a restaurant based on the ethnicity of the cook is crazy to me, when you should be going to a restaurant based on the actual quality of the food and the environment of the restaurant. What is the product they're providing you? Jagger Black. You claim these people somehow stole someone's livelihood, though they were completely unaffected by the opening of their restaurant. In return, you actually destroyed their livelihood by closing their restaurant. And worst, you did it on the basis of their skin color. You are a racist, and you are exactly what you claim to hate. You are the definition of a hypocrite. Direwolf, out. If you want to hear Direwolf and Friends streaming live semi-daily on political and social commentary, as well as playing games like Quiplash and Drawful, please check out the YouTube channel Direwolf Radio, which is linked in the description of this video.